Hey everybody, Greg Casillo from Casillo.com. Before you watch this video, I need you to jump over to this video, the exposure basics video, so that you understand the concepts that I'm talking about. Aperture, shutter, and ISO. So jump over to that and come right back to this video. Okay, now you're back. So I've had a lot of questions lately about how do you set your camera? What's the right exposure? What's the right shutter speed? What's the right aperture? What's the right ISO? And there's no such thing as the right any of those. You just need to learn to set it, to learn to create the image kind of in your mind first, and figure out, do I want a shallow depth of field? Do I want to stop action? Do I want some special effect with a high ISO? Or whatever it is. So basically, create your own rule of thumb. My rule of thumb, when I'm shooting a portrait, for example, is typically to have a shutter speed around f4, 2.8, something like that, my widest open I can, and then set my shutter speed around 200th of a second, maybe a 1/125th with a 70 to 200 lens, and then I set my ISO up and down wherever I need it to be. That's my rule of thumb. That's where I like to shoot most of my portraits. Now for a landscape, probably going to go to f8, maybe f11. And then I'll set my shutter speed accordingly. I'll set my ISO accordingly, depending upon what I want to do and what I want to create. So you need to understand how each of those things work all together, okay? One to the next to the next. Start with your aperture, which is the way I do it. I like to start with my aperture and really think about that scene. Think about how I want this to come out, all right? How do I want everything to work together in the image? In my mind, I think about aperture priority first. So I'm kind of picturing that image in my mind and saying, okay, do I want a shallow depth of field or do I need a high shutter speed? Those are the two that really matter, okay? Are the kids moving around, running around and doing stuff that I need to make sure I have a high enough shutter speed? Or do I have a long lens on and I'm going to have more camera shake? Whatever it may be. So you need to think about those two things first. Then set your ISO wherever it needs to be. In fact, I had an email the other day from somebody that said, well, when I raise my shutter speed to 0.002 of a second, the screen gets really, really dark. And it does get really dark because you need to raise your ISO in order to compensate for that. And if you don't quite understand that, again, go back to my exposure basics video, play with the camera and get it figured out, because that's the only way that you're going to learn and the only way that you're going to advance in your photography. Speaking of learning, just the other day, let me back up. I'm a probie. I just joined the Lionville Fire Company less than a year ago. And so I need to learn what's going on, how to see what's going on with the fire. I have a lot of learning to do, a lot of advancing to do in my career in the fire service as a volunteer. So in order to do that, I've got to, number one, study what I'm doing and learn and get better at it, all right? So in order to do that, just the other day, here's my example. Just the other day, I was at a chimney fire. In the front of the house was, I was around the back of the house. I was on the truck, around the back of the house, and we were throwing ladders and working on ventilation in the back. And as a probie, I'm the guy at the bottom of the ladder, holding the ladder, passing tools up, run fetch me, all that stuff. So, and that's cool. That's a way to learn. But one of the chiefs was standing there, and I walked over to him and I said, look, what's going on? Tell me what you're looking at. He said, well, you see how that smoke is puffing out real fast, real fast? And I said, yeah. And we said, well, that means there's probably heat coming out of there. Whether there's fire or not, we don't know. But you need to get rid of that heat. And that heat is what's going to cause another fire, another flare-up. I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. Nobody had really said that to me before. And so by asking those questions and learning, that was ideal for me to really start to advance into what I'm doing and to really see what's going on. School is fine, classes are fine, but once you have those basics, understand those basics from school, then you start to apply stuff in the real world, and it just all starts to click and make sense. The same happens with photography. You need to understand the basics, figure out how you want to set everything, okay? Set your exposure, pick your lens, all that stuff. It's going to take time for you to really gauge that and figure out what you're using, And I'll definitely be in the new year, be doing more hands-on videos, behind-the-scenes videos, and I have some really cool ideas of what to do and what not to do. All right? So, homework. Here's your homework. For beginners, what I want you to do is learn your exposure, learn your shutter speed, learn your aperture. Go outside and shoot a range of photos from a 30th of a second or a 15th of a second or a quarter of a second all the way up to, you know, 2,000ths, 8,000ths of a second, whatever your camera does. And the same with your aperture. Run the entire gamut of the aperture and play with your ISO and really understand all of those, all right? If you don't understand those, and by the way, you should be in manual mode when you're doing this. Once you understand those, then you can really start to advance. Now, for the advanced photographers, here's what I want. Here's your job. Here's your homework for the new year. Yours is going to be to go out and find 5 photographers and start studying their work. It could be me. It could be some other great photographers that I've talked about in the past, like Yusuf Karsh. He's one of my favorites. His portraits are amazing. Through the 19th century, sorry, 20th century. Anyway, start to learn and study what they did. Study the light. See what the light's falling on the face or in the landscape or in the anything scene. Whatever type of photography you're into, start to study those photographers' work. That's the only way that you're going to get better at it and advance in what you're doing and get really get to the pinnacle of where you want to be and to be able to create an image just by looking in a room and setting it up and going. So do that. That's your homework for 2012. Greg Casillo, Casillo.com. See ya. Keep shooting.